Hey, welcome back, class. In this lecture, we're going to talk about JSON C++ processing. A lot of content that will talk about the relationship between JSON and the rest of the software development. On the other hand, will be discussed under the context of homework assignment number 5. So just let you know that we're moving to a different topics. So we're going to start looking at JSON C++ library, and also we look at the chapter 15 runtime error and the exceptions as well. So I assume you already read or viewed the short tutorial. I post a few links on Facebook, the class group, that you can actually take a look, which give you a good introduction. Is about 10 or 15 minutes. Please take a look at this if you haven't done so. So what is JSON? JavaScript object notation. It's essentially what we try to do is we want to represent the object in the data format and such that we can exchange the data on the internet. So it's a standardized data interchange format. So here is a very quick review. It's a very simple format of JSON. Is what we call a key value pair. So you will have a curly bracket to encase pairs of keys and the value. And the thing is that the key is a string in this data type. And then one of the things that you can reorder between key, for example, in this example, key 1 is first, but it doesn't have to be. You can actually move key 2 and the value 2 in front of key 1. And in terms of the JSON format JSON does not restrict you how you're going to order that. However, the application, when you try to parse and understand the JSON, you might have some application semantics which order might matter. But in general, in JSON, the representation, it doesn't matter, just represent the data, it doesn't represent a logical flow, which will be introduced by the interpretation, which is application. And then we talk about there are some basic data type about JSON, such as a string, where to show you, or the Boolean, or the number, or you can have a null. If this JSON has nothing, then it's null, or you can have array. And the value could be another object, which is another type, JSON column value. And the array type will look like this. So if you see a bracket instead of curly bracket, it's a bracket represent that is an array type. For example, the last line of this slide, that the key is the key, of course, the column. And then you see that after the column is a bunch of curly bracket encapsulated in the bracket. I mark a red there, which means that now I have an array with a bunch of elements, and each of the element was actually encapsulated by a pair of curly bracket. So this format is very simple and very generic, and it can handle a lot of objects we would like to represent. Okay, so let's give a simple example. By the way, this example is from the Wikipedia page of JSON. I put a link there. This essentially represents a record about a person on file. So you can see that it has a key such as a first name, last name, and it has an age, but the type is 27, which is a number instead of a string. And in the address, you can see that the address after address is another object. So address has another, you can think about everything behind the address within that curly bracket is an object. So it means that the value is an object, which itself is another JSON, by the way. And the next one, you can see that the phone number, because you have a multiple phone number, and then you saw the bracket, and which means that it's an array. So it means phone number has the array of two elements. That the first element is 212-555-1234 is a home phone number, which is a JSON, and then the second JSON is in fact another element which is type and numbers. By the way, in JSON, when you have an array like that, it doesn't have to be that every single element array, the number of attributes are exactly the same. It doesn't have to be. It's if your application enforces them to have it, that's a different story. But in general, you can represent array with different type of object that you can put it together. Okay, and then you have children, which is array, but this array has a 0 element. And then, of course, then this person is single status. That's why the spouse field is null. So this is basically capture up all basic data type, object, null array that you could have to represent a JSON as a key value pair. But the key is a string and then colon and whatever you want to have over there. Okay. So JSON is really, really useful. It's really useful. Sometimes if you look at the web service we're enjoying today, it's essentially XML and JSON. So if you happen to look at the source code of your web page, you can actually using your browser and click for the source code for the web. You will see that it's typically just XML and JSON. There part of that will be XML, part of that will be JSON. That, however, I do want to say is that once this HTTP format with both XML and JSON pass through the front end, and basically the XML is gone, but JSON is still there. And if you in this picture, that whatever web server access, it go into the database, what's in the database will be JSON and no XML. Okay, so essentially I'm saying that the JSON is not only useful in to support the most popular application, HTTP. It supports everything in the information technology. It supports database, it supports any kind of data processing, any kind of object-oriented paradigm, any kind of format you want to store. For example, the Facebook API, if you actually using that, it's basically is a JSON format. So so for example, that this is architecture we're talking about. We have a client make a request. For example, this is HTTP post. So what's a get and post? Get is I'm getting some resources. Post is that I try to update something. I mean, for example, this is a typical application using JSON. That the server you send the HTTP post, and behind the post you can see it's a JSON. Basically, I'm requesting a weather server to provide the temperature for Paris, and the units should be Celsius. Okay, so essentially I'm trying to ask the server to update its web page from maybe Fahrenheit to Celsius, and therefore it's going to send back also the result is a JSON that's actually saying that this is the range of the temperature currently we observe in Paris. So you can see that JSON is used in those kind of scenario, and you can see that the data from the low to the high temperature, it will be stored in the client, the database, to keep tracking the weather of Paris for maybe past 10 years. And then we can do a lot of environmental or climate change research and using JSON format to do that. Of course, we can change a scenario that between Facebook server and Facebook app, and between Facebook app and the Facebook server, it's if you at the highest level it's XML and JSON. But the thing is that if you really want to access the API, it's going to be JSON left alone. Okay, so for example, this is what we call Facebook Graph API Explorer. Some of you might have used that. This is if you want to develop any Facebook application, that is a very nice tool for you to understand how this thing works. So in this example, you can see that this is representing a profile of a particular Facebook user. And it has ID, it has a name, it has its friend, and it's a friend's ID or a bunch of other information. If you look at the format, this is format of JSON, internally represent, and also represent this format being sent back and forth between variety of component that needs this information to perform either data analytics or recommendation or doing any kind of application that's actually using this format to do that. Okay, and talk about Facebook. So I gave a post. I put a post on our the class discussion group on Facebook not too long ago, around early May. So I talk about the internet outage in our area, and actually using this to as an example for our homework assignment number 5, and that's why I translate this into this JSON. So you probably already start looking into this. This is a base input JSON. That's you need to write the program to parse this JSON. This is a base input.json. If you look at this, this is kind of hard to read initially, but of course you can use different kind of JSON tool to actually provide more of a structure. I mean, for example, I will show you that this is basically translate into this particular scenario. So in this scenario, you can see that I kind of modify a little bit because I changed from the Facebook ID to our VS ID. And I also added a few features, which I think will be interesting to have in a social media discussion. Okay, so this picture represents the base input JSON. So what we have, you can see that is somebody make a post, maybe on his own wall, and from this person, Oracle, at this time, stamp, and with a message with a link for people to click. And then we have somebody leave a variety of comments and reaction. For example, this person, Peter, leave a comment after the original post, and apparently the original author, Oracle, replied the message and basically adding another comment. And then we can see there's a variety of reaction that being clicked. So that is a typical social media post sharing. And this is essentially represent the original JSON that you have. If you use your Visual Studio Code to click on .json, it will automatically parse into this format. By the way, this is exactly the same I showed you 2 slides ago, but with a much more we call styled string. Okay, styled string means that it will parse JSON into different level. I mean, for example, the highest level have ID, and then we have a from, and then we have to, we have a message, we have a links, we have actions, and we have a bunch of other things because the screen I cannot show you all of them. But that's called the first level key under this JSON. But then if you go to from actually is the value part is another object contain 2 key value pair of avatar name and VS ID. And the 2, however, is an array. And the array, the key value is data. And then column with an array that within the array, now I have only one element, which is, again, is with avatar name and VS ID. And then I have a count. Okay, just to let you know that this is a notation. Array doesn't have to always have a data, but to simplify, this is also the way that say Facebook Graph API use is that whenever you have array, you use data to actually represent both the array itself and also the count, means that how many elements that you have within this array. All right, I will show you more specific example that why sometimes the data and count they need both to be there, and also sometimes the element in the data section is much smaller than the count you have. Is that that's an inconsistency? It might not be. It might be something else that we try to deal with. Okay. So that's basically give you the idea. So you are asked, well, how do you actually get the JSON, like base input JSON, which looks pretty ugly, into the style format? Of course, you can just open it using VSC, Visual Studio Code, and then you can do that. But the other thing is that this homework, we actually give you a bunch of programs, including one is we call HW5 parse. And HW5 parse, if you do HW5 parse on the base input, it will generate the style output. Okay, you have the code. And the important thing is that to parsing a JSON is really simple. I show you a segment of code. By the way, this is about almost 50% of the code that's within the HW5 parse.cpp. The rest 50% is actually just try to open the file and read the file. Okay, so you can say read the file and then you call this code. And this piece of code is essentially try to process a JSON, try to convert the JSON, whatever the JSON string or bytes that you have, like base input.json, and convert that into a C++ representation called JSON column value. So we are converting string to value, which then you can apply all the JSON related to the library function call to actually access. Okay, so essentially this, you should look at a few things. Now, number one, I define my v message, okay, myv underscore message, as the object of JSON value I want to create. Okay, and then a few lines, you can see that I'm actually calling a reader pointer to parse. That particular function is actually parsing the input string, the text string, and to see that whether that is have no problem from the JSON syntax. And then the output is going to put into the myv underscore message. Okay. And then after you parse that, and the last line is essentially just using the object and then call this function called toStyled string on the bottom, and which will then print out that string very nicely. Okay, that's the code that you have. You can just look at the code, how to read JSON in, and then just convert that string into the JSON CPP object called JSON underscore value. Okay, so we're going to handle this. So conceptually, that what you see is this picture. I do want to give you a little bit of motivation about why we're doing this particular homework assignment. It's not just about learning JSON. It's not just learning about C++, but also we want to leverage the chance to see how information can be represented in a modern information services, such as social media system. So this JSON is mimicking what we call Graph API. By the way, I list the Graph API references link down there. So Facebook Graph API has variety of services, variety of classes. And we only look at one of them, which is probably the most important one, is a post. Okay, a post is when you want to send something to let people discuss, such as you share something on your wall, or you actually post something on news media, such as the New York Times or ABC News. So the post has a post ID. That's why inside the design, you will see that we need to handle the identifier of this. If you scroll down a little bit from the post, by the way, the post has so many attributes that I think some of those are irrelevant. So I only select a few, but I also add a couple which I think they should have, but they didn't have, which I think is important for us to do social media information exchange. So we kind of select a few and then add a few over there. And then the homework assignment number 6, we're going to use this to develop something more. So for example, ID. Identity is very important. Every post has a unique ID. So that's why in the original base underscore input.json, the first key value pair is ID, which is the identity of this. Okay. And you scroll down further, then you have this things like link, like a message or message tags, and object ID. So those are already included in the base update JSON. And you scroll down even more, this is the most interesting, that you have every post have people leave comments, people have a reaction, and have two. So that's why those are arrays that we want to develop and to connect other kind of object in our application together. Okay, so those are the objects. Just the homework assignment was designed in a much simplified, but probably captured the most important point about a JSON format or object model that we're using pretty much every day by billions of users. Okay. All right, so this is the as I mentioned to you earlier, this is a representation of the style string that's essentially representing the first one is ID, which is okay. I should actually tell you a little bit about the ID. The ID really have a two portion. The first portion usually represent where this is going to be posted. If this is going to be posted on my wall, then the first portion of the ID before this underscore is my Facebook ID. Or if I post it on a Facebook group or Facebook page, that would be the group ID or page ID. And so that's why that page, that ID, the first portion is, I put it there, is my own VSID, is a VSID of Oracle. And then the second part after the underscore is what I call a post ID. So basically a page ID plus a post ID uniquely identify this particular post among all the trillion posts that we have being circulated around the world. That's why its ID has a two portion. You should know that. And then, of course, you have a from, you have a to, which is array, as I mentioned. And then you have the message that we saw that. And then you have a bunch of other things. Just give you some example. So what we're going to do here is like this. So we have our base JSON. And we can parse it into the JSON format. But we're still representing JSON. We're just changing from the text format into a JSON format that we have a layers, we have a bracket, we have an array that we know who they are. But we still need to translate that into a C++ world representing by C++ project, because inside when you process things in the back end, that sometimes you want to handle it in a C++ way because you have other tool you want to use back there. And so this homework assignment is really for you to build a two-way street from the JSON world to the C++ world, and from the C++ world back to the JSON world. So then if you can connect this two worlds, then essentially all the tool, all the nice thing, all the compatibility that you can have to extend your programming experience this way. I mean, in fact, in the modern programming today, a lot of the effort we're doing is no longer develop an individual component. A lot of the effort we're thinking about, well, how do we actually put this world and the other world together? And so essentially this is a good exercise for you to start thinking about how do you put the JSON world and C++ world together. What does that mean? What does that really, what kind of difficulty, what is the challenge you need to deal with. That's what I hope you will be grasp through this experience. So for this homework assignment, I didn't mandate you to say, well, what classes you're going to build. But I gradually through the end of this lecture, number one, you will see that some kind of example about what classes I actually developed. But also I would give my experience and advice on this issue is that whatever classes you're going to define, that this classes, the structure should be very similar or almost identical to the structure or to the relationship to the object that you need to model in the JSON world. Because when you have this kind of modeling, then number one, of course, conversion is very easy. And number two, if you want to do something in one world, you want this to change in another world, it's actually almost immediately you have that mapping there. And then the development, the conversion, the logic, everything become really simplified. When you really have a two world, they are really compatible with each other. Okay, so that is, I give you as a choice, I just give you some reference for you to take a look. Of course, we'll provide you a lot of support in the process, and hopefully you will be able to deliver a program that will do this conversion correctly. Okay, so I'm going to tell you this. There are 5 steps for you to process homework assignment number 5. I already kind of mentioned a little bit, but now I want to be more specific because some of those I think is important for you to know in advance, so you don't have to wondering, you don't have to waste time. You can actually get some of the experience from somebody already done it and see how this can apply to you. Okay. There are 5 steps. Number 1 is parsing and access JSON. So you already know, I already showed you the code how to parse a JSON. You don't have to write the parser. If you want to write the parser to get it right, it's probably by itself, it will take 1 week or 2 weeks to do that. Well, the library already have it. The JSON CPP library already can parse it. Not only that, but they also provide functions for you to access individual element. You can see that the JSON could be complicated. They have a first level key value pair, then they have an object, they have an array. Within the array, they have another object. So they're having a very complicated structure within the JSON, even though it got linearized into this string that I show you, this horrible base input.json. But it has this structure, and then it has a function, has a way for you to access each element. And I'm going to show you today how you can do that. So that's one step. You need to parse and you need to access each of the element from the JSON world using C++. It's not C++ object, but you're using C++ program to access each field in the JSON. Okay, that's the JSON world. Number 1 step. Number 2 step, as I indicated earlier, that you need to create, which means design and implement, a set of C++ classes that's representing the information presented to you in the base underscore input.json. So it means that for example, in my implementation, I have a class called class post, and I have a class called class comment, class reaction. I have a class person, and I have a class ink. I have a class I have a class tag. So I have a bunch of class I design, which is I look at the base JSON, understand the structure using the style format, but that's why important I gave you what is the JSON really represent, the Facebook Graph API, Post API. So based on that, I design probably 6 or 7 different classes. And by the way, another class I create, a new one, is a timestamp. You see that there's a timestamp everywhere, created time, update time. And for the timestamp part, I can actually give you my code because, but that to translate the JSON string exactly. There are so many time format. Let's just fix on one format. It's easier for you. It's a piece of code. You can have it from me and then just use that. Okay. So you design the C++ class. You know how to access the JSON each field. And number three, I consider number three is the hardest, is most tedious. It's what I call pigeonholing. Essentially what you have is a bunch of C++ object or classes you design. And over here, you need to access every single element in the JSON. Now, how do you actually map, right? To put this in here, put this in here, put this in here. That is essentially the tedious one. But once that's done, if you've done that correctly, you're basically connect this two worlds together. So that is the third step, which is a very important step. And step number four is that, okay, now you create the C++ object, and then you have the JSON pigeonholing into each of the object. But this is a very important. Number four step is not hard. I'm going to show you how to do it. But it's very essential for you to be able to revert it back to the JSON, because we not just want to pigeonholing into the C++, we want to reconstruct the JSON. Okay, by the way, the part two is actually reconstructing a different way, take two JSON and merge them together to C++ world and then come back with a one JSON. Okay, so this is essentially the other direction. If you don't have a lot of software development experience, this could be tedious because now you have a huge number of objects potentially. I mean, some of the JSON, I mean, I can tell you that the JSON I have been dealing with. So I remember I had a JSON, just one single JSON, 2 GB. Why? Because this JSON represents an activity of millions of users. Just one post, one article, maybe before Clinton and Trump debate, second debate, by the way. And there was 400,000 comments with 10 million reactions and in real time. And that JSON, 2 GB. And then there was a huge information. Well, how do I actually reconstruct that JSON from all the objects I already developed? Of course, you don't need to deal with that kind of scale in this format. But what I want to say is that this is a very good software development experience I like to convey to you, is that we use object-oriented. We break a very complicated problem into small objects. Then what we do is that we associate with each individual object with a program called dumpj. And dumpj is great for JSON type of environment. Remember, JSON is reordering is okay. So I'm actually breaking the JSON into small objects, and then by building the relationship among the object, I can actually recapture all the small JSON and put together, I will have my original JSON. Instead of for you to have to look at each object, you let the object provide their pieces, and then you just do a stitching together. Voila, you have the original JSON. So that part is not hard, but is conceptually, you might never know is possible. And I want to show you how to do that. This is the code. I call this name, I call dumpj. Okay, when I start writing C++ program, I always, for every single object, I have a program. I have a member function called dump. Why is that? The dump is just basically I want to look at the content of this object. And so I can do debugging. I can know whether I'm actually putting the right thing, I'm getting out the right thing. So it's always have a function called dump, which is for C++ development. But dumpj is, instead of printing to a standard output, dumpj is I want to dump in the JSON format, means that it's coming out as a key value pair. Then that's very easy. I can actually debugging whether each individual object is actually really have the things I want. I can check with the original JSON even visually to see if, oh, I have this key value pair here. Do I have this key value pair there? Okay, so with dumpj, I can do debugging. And also, I can do this reconstruction because if each of the objects are providing their small pieces, if I can construct the object in the way I'm breaking it and collecting this back, I'm actually going to have exactly the same. That's the painless way for doing this. Okay, after you're done with number 1, 2, 3, 4, you augment every single class with a dumpj function. And all you need to do for homework assignment number 5 is just call the dumpj at the highest level C++ object, which is the post itself. Because the input, the JSON, is actually being stored as a post, and the post object is going to connect to all other objects, like a reaction object, comment object, and other things. So at the end, to do that, you just call the dumpj to the highest level object. It recursively call dumpj to the lower level object, and then each level they construct, they stitch the lower level JSON they have, they put together, voila, you have your original object. Okay, this 5-step provide you a guidance about how you should approach your homework assignment number 5. And I do want to say that when you approach this, you should think about this step. I mean, if you're really, you know what you're doing, you don't have to follow a step, you can do everything yourself. But if you're not sure, then I will ask you to say, where are you in making progress? Have you done step 1 and step 2? And then we can actually move on from there. I mean, if you know how to access the JSON, are you sure about that? If you know that, then I will look at your C++ design and see how you're going to do the pigeonholing. I mean, my guess is that there are 2 major challenge in this homework. Number 1 is that you really step 3, as I mentioned, because step 3 really testing whether your understanding about the JSON is consistent with your design in step 2 about C++. If you did the right thing, then basically step 3 will be very natural to put them together. So that's why you need to push yourself to step 3 as early as possible, because step 3 is going to create the mismatch and realize that you need to go back to revise mostly step 2. Because step 2 has all the elements that you need to provide. Okay, step 4 is conceptually interesting, but it's not hard to implement. So especially if you've done, that's why I put step 4 not in front of step 3, because step 3 really represents the correct relationship between the JSON world and the C++ world. If that hasn't been worked out, then your step 4, which is recursively try to dump it, won't happen correctly as well. Okay, so that's why the order is try to push yourself to get to step 3 as early as possible. Once you get to step 3, step 4 probably only take 1 hour for you to implement the dumpj, because dumpj is like 5 or 6 lines of code for each class. I expect you shouldn't have more than 10 different classes, and so that should be done very soon. Okay, so we're going to show you an example. We'll support you to do that. I mean, this homework is by no means easy. It's the way to really similar to step 3. Similar to homework assignment number 3 is conceptually challenging. It's ask you, but we try to build you up with your knowledge and experience. Now I think you should face this challenge, but we still support you. You're not working alone. So we're going to provide you how to, for example, parse and access the JSON field. That means how do you use the JSON CPP library, and I'm going to show you a tutorial and give you the example sample code. I mean, for example, this piece of sample code I presented here is basically trying to get, MYV is, by the way, a JSON value object, which means that you convert from the original file or string into this object called myv, and then myv is object, so it has a member function called get members names. Essentially, get members name is getting all the key, all the first level key you have. So remember, you have a multiple value, multiple layer. The highest level is basically the first level key value pair, and get member name will give you all the first level key, the name of the key, and then you know what attribute you need to deal with. I mean, for example, when I start developing this, I always run this program to get the JSON I need to deal with to see what are my first value, first layer names. So I know that represent whether I need to create a class for each one of them. I mean, if this is a simple data type, I don't know. I don't need to because it's going to be attribute. But anything which is itself as an object or as an array, then I have to probably develop a class for that. Okay, so for example, the highest level that when you have this object, that I have a class called post. So as I mentioned, the post has the first level key. For example, ID is a key, but ID is just a string. It's a string with two ID with underscore linked them together. And from is another key, but from has VSID as an object, it's a VSID and the name, avatar name. So therefore, I'm just reusing my my design from homework assignment number 3. I use class person. So I use my person.h to actually capture from. Even though my from has a lot of other things, but I use the VSID and avatar name to do that. Created time, I have another one. I will provide you the code because I feel that this will speed up your development about the time format, which could be confusing. You can just use my time library. I designed a my time for you to easily doing conversion between the time of a format from the string to JSON and from the time goes back. Okay, and then we have comments. We have reactions. And under comments, we have more reaction because you could click like on the post, but you can also click like on the comment. But they are separate objects. It's not just object, they're arrays, array of objects. So for example, comments are typically the array of individual comments. So essentially what I model in my post is I have a comment object, class comment. And then I have a vector of comments, which is the array in C++ to represent the variable called comments. And also I have a reaction, and which is the reaction to the post itself. The reaction is a vector or array of all the reaction objects. So just about here, I have a few classes already. I have a class post. I have a class person. I have a class time. And I have a class comment. I have a class reaction. Okay, so those are the classes I create based on the information I got from the post. And in the following, I'm going to show you the example of reaction because if you know how I handle reaction, the same way of accessing the object will be fairly similar to handle other type of object. Okay, so I'm going to show you the pigeonhole part. The pigeonhole, how do I put the JSON part into my design of the reaction object? And then from this example, you will see that how these things happen in this segment of a code, and then from there, you can actually try to see if you understand this, and then we can discuss over the office hour as well in greater detail. Okay, so this piece of code is how I put the JSON column value object that I got from base input.json into my reactions as well as the post, because remember the post has a vector of reaction, and each of the element in the reactions vector is a reaction. So the first line, I define the vector. You can see I define vector reaction star vec underscore reaction. So I declare an array of pointer. So under this project, you can do reference, but I decide to use pointer. So it means that I have an array of pointer for me to allocate and to handle this reaction. Okay, so I define the vector is called vec underscore reaction, is a vector of pointers to class reaction. Okay, all right. After I define, the first thing I test is whether this reaction count is greater than 0. Okay, so now the first thing is that this is kind of flexibility about JSON. JSON is so flexible that it didn't check whether it has or has not have this particular element. For example, I could post something that nobody provide any reaction because nobody is interested, or Facebook never delivered that to my mobile phone for some reason. They think this is not interesting. So you're not going to get any reaction. So essentially, I have to have a way to even realize whether this one has any reaction at all. So now I have to access. Remember, we have this variable under any array. We have two parts. One key is called data. The data is the array itself. But I also have another key called count. The count represents that how many element I really have in that array. So the first thing, the red line I want to show you is that I want to, at least in this homework assignment, I'm going to assume that if the count is a 0, that means you have no reaction. Just for this homework assignment, okay? There is other way to check, but I want to just simplify the problem and saying that if the count is equal to 0, then it doesn't have any reaction for me to further doing pigeonholing. All right, so essentially this first line in red is trying to check, make sure that that count must be greater than 0, and I'm going to do the processing. Otherwise, I'm going to skip the whole thing. So, okay, there are two elements I want to tell you is that, well, I have to, how do you actually even access to that count? So now this is the part you're going to do. This is a really nice way for JSON to me to do this. Again, my V is the JSON value that I have to contain the whole thing. And I know my first level key has one key called reactions. Okay, I have that already. I use my code I showed you earlier to get all my first level reaction keys. So I know this key actually exists. All right, once I have that key, then you can see that I know under this key reaction, the next level, I have another key called count. So for me to access that in JSON is just put the first pair of bracket, putting the first key, and then put the second key, the second level key after the first one. And that will give me the JSON value for that particular second level. So essentially when I say this, my V reactions bracket, count bracket, that will get to that value. But now I have to do something extra. You can see this is as int because I need to interpret that value because sometimes it's an integer, sometimes it's double, sometimes it's a string. So I have to convert that JSON value. That if you don't provide as int, it's going to be a JSON value. Itself is a JSON value. So when you call as int, it will convert that value into an integer and for me to do the comparison. So now you can see that why we need to do this because we're converting a JSON world into C++ world. In C++ world, I have to make sure that this data type match with each other. So you have, if you look at in the button, I provide a web link for you to see all the JSON CPP value. You can see that all the function like as in, as double, as string, as a bunch of other things that for you to convert that JSON value into something else. So that is a nice resource for you to know what's possible. So I'm only show you the example for you to actually just access to one JSON value in the second level from the top. Okay. All right. So what we have, you can see that this is a whole JSON from the base input JSON. So now we're actually just capturing this part because I'm only handle reaction. I'm capturing the first level, the keyword reaction. So you can see that I'm actually capture this red part I actually taken out. And this part has two variables. One is the data, which is represented array. And the second key is count, is exactly what we just did. Okay, so I make this a little bit bigger. So this is the part. Now the second code try to handle this part of the JSON in the whole base input.json. Okay, so this is the array. It basically is a reactions array, has only one element. The avatar name Peter with VSID, whatever. His type is set. The creation time is whatever, May 2nd. Okay, and the count is 1 because there's only one element. Okay, so so now I took out the reaction. Now I know that there was two elements. One is data and one is account. And then further, I know there's two elements. So I can say the previous slide, I said I can access reaction and then count. But you can also say reaction and the data. However, when you say reaction and data, it's actually become the array itself. So that's why when I do this, what I show you earlier slide, the reaction is actually pointing, when you say my V reaction, you're pointing the whole sky blue area between the pair of the red curly bracket. But when you say count, you're really pointing at that one as a JSON object, and then use the as integer to pull that value out of your value. Okay, so I hope now you know that first line. How do you actually parse that? Looking at the data and then using the JSON the format about how you can access the data to do that. Okay. All right, now let's move on to the next slide. So once you know that, okay, when you go in, you got the count is greater than 0. And now what you want to do is that you want to iterate through this array, because you know once the count is not 0 means that you have a one or more element. I mean, you might have a one element. You might have, like in my cases, I have a 60 million element that I have to went through. So I have to write a loop to do that. And the loop has to use, you see, I use that count again. I use that count again to see, well, how many elements. This is a standard loop in C programming, and I is equal to 0, I is smaller than this, and things like that. Okay, so that's the count. But now within the loop, we're actually going to do something kind of interesting. Now look at the red part. The red part says my V reaction data. Now it's not reaction count, it's reaction data. But because data is an array, now you can see that the first part from my V all the way to data double quote bracket end, this part is actually represent a JSON value that's an array. Because it's an array, now you can add indexes just like you do with normal array in C++. Now I can say array index I. And then now this is because I define I is the index of this array that I'm going through the loop. This naturally represent the JSON object. I'm actually going to iterate through this array that I have. Okay, you will see that now I define a new JSON value called LJV. And then LJV is equal to each of the array element. Okay, let me actually tell you why I'm doing this. This is programming practices, because if you will see I repeatedly using the red phrase, I mean, the variable name could be really long. And therefore, I'm just using this LJV to basically shorten it such that in the future, inside the scope of this loop, I only need to deal with that. That's just a programming practices. Okay, so we're here. You can see that now we have this JSON LV reaction data I, and what we really have is the 0 element. It's a 0 element means that I is equal to 0, and then LJV is really pointing out that only element we have over here. So that's what we're doing here. Okay, and then with the LJV being assigned as the value for that particular array element, now you can see I'm starting pulled out the key from that element. So I pulled out 4 elements, as you can see from the JSON. I pulled out avatar name, I pulled out VSID, I pulled out created time, I pulled out time. Those are the 4 elements that from that particular array element. Okay, so now let's actually take a look at this. Now you can see that I started doing pigeonholing. I'm actually put those 4 information into at least 3 pigeonhole. So the first pigeonhole I do is the person, because I know that this reaction must come from a person. So therefore, what should I do? I actually, at this moment, I create a person object. I create a person object, put the first 2, which is avatar name and VSID. And I put their name, and then look at what I did. L_JV avatar name, that I actually get it out from the value of the avatar name as a key. And then as string, now I'm not as integer as as string because it's a string. And this will convert that into a C++ standard string for me to fit into the constructor of the person object. And VSID, I did the same thing. So essentially what I have is that I put 2 of the 4 key and the value into the person object, because now I'm converting, I'm no longer, it's a flat structure. I now have a person object represent that the person responsible for providing this reaction. And I have a time. As I told you, you don't need to worry about the time. I actually developed this time routine for you. And I'm again using L_JV with the created time, and then use this time to produce the as string, and then put into the time routine. And then I will have a time object as well. Okay, so I create a person object here. I also create a time object representing that. Okay, and finally, the third line, what I did is that after I have this, hold on one second. I just want to say one thing before I move on. So I forgot to show you this, but earlier I said I use LJV avatar name. But the thing is, this is equivalent to say reaction data I. I just want to tell you that very quickly that this 2 representation, they're the same. I mean, I could use the second representation, but my code will look really long. It's like unbelievably ugly for me to read. Okay, just to let you know. Okay, so after I create the person object, after I create the time object, so now I can create a reaction object, because ultimately over here, I'm dealing with reaction. So you can see now I'm actually creating a reaction object, and then I create it in the pointer format using new. So I create this pointer called react_ptr. It's a new reaction, and the constructor take 3 parameters. The first parameter is a type, which I actually got it from L_JV type. I can get it out, which is a string. It could be sad, could be love, could be happy, sarcastic. You can design anything you want. I guess it's basically just adjective. Okay, and the thing is, the second parameter is the person. That's a react_p_ptr. It's a person we just create a few lines above, which contain avatar name and VSID. And the third pointer is the what I call the time pointer. So I have the type, I have the person, I have the time pointer, and this is all the information I need to record it as a reaction object. So after I execute this line, I have a reaction object in front of me. But in this design, because every single post might have more than one reaction, therefore I'm using this vector, as I said in the earlier first line, is a vec underscore reaction. That was a target. I tried to build a set of pointer to reaction as a vector, as an array to represent how many reaction I have. So I use this vector C++ interface called pushback. So pushback basically is adding an element toward the end of this vector. Okay, so I put the react underscore pointer as an argument to pushback for the vec reactor. So this loop, this is one iteration of a loop. I'm actually handling one reaction and putting that reaction into that vec. So when I get out of the loop, now I see this. Okay, so I have this outside of the loop, and at the end of the loop, I basically collect all my reactions within this particular post. And I put all of them into this vec underscore reaction. And then the final step is I put this reactions vectors linking to the post. Because remember, objects are not standalone, they're related. Because why we're doing this? Because we're stitching all the reaction and associate it back to the post. That's why the last line is essentially in the my post, which is the object of the class post, which I'm going to show you next slide. I'm actually assigning the address of the vec creation and then assign to the reaction. Okay, and that is basically what we have been doing for this particular iteration to associate all the reaction to the post, and also how do I access the JSON element and then call the new operator to create classes of objects of classes to actually hosting all the information. Okay, so now I'm going to show you, this is the code of my class post. You can see that it's not complicated. I mean, by the way, for simplicity, I just put everything to public so I can access the variable very easily. I didn't bother to write like a get set function for each one of them. I mean, by the way, sometimes if you work on a project, you want to get it fast, that's okay. For you to just first get it to public to get the concept right. And then you gradually decide where you're going to move to protected area or private area. Okay. All right, so you can see that in this slide, I have a variety of attributes. I have the ID, profile ID, post ID. I have author, which is the person who wrote the post. And then we have a to, which is I call the receiver. And we have the message, we have the link, we have the action, we have the reaction, which we just showed you. And then we have comments and we have time, both created time and update time. And then we have the Boolean, which is published. So this represents all the information that you need to have that contained in the base input.json. So essentially, this list of element is one for you to check whether you actually write the C++ class design that's matching what you have in the JSON. If you actually missed it, that means there is some part of the information from the JSON is going to fall in on the sky. Nobody catch it, and then so when you reproduce, you're not going to reproduce correctly, or you have too many, and which is also not optimized because you want to be precisely matched with that. So if you have too many, you might reconstruct something extra, which is also might or might not be desirable. Okay, so that's the definition about the class post. You can see that is matched exactly. Well, you might notice now there is a one thing I mentioned very earlier. I call it dump J. So after you do the stitching, after you pigeonholing every JSON stuff into the C++ world, now we're talking about how do you reconstruct the information in the C++ world back to the JSON. That's why I introduced this function called dumpj. So dumpj is returning a pointer to JSON value from inside the object. So essentially, dumpj is basically get the JSON value representation back for this C++ object. By the way, when we look at this picture, we have a variety of objects on the right that we construct for the pigeonholing. For each of the objects, as long as it fit the pigeonhole, I will have a dumpj. And when I have a dumpj, I'm actually not writing a huge dumpj routine to try to reconstruct everything, because I said everything could be really, really long. And it could be so many layers of recursion. But this is a nice thing about object-oriented paradigm, is that I break things into small concept called object. I need to write dumpj for this small routine, which then it will be a lot easier for me to develop. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example. How do I write dumpj routine for the reaction object we just stitching together? So here is my code for dumpj for reaction. So you can see that this is a reaction colon dumpj. Okay, this is, you can count, is if you remove this debugging code, it's really 4 lines of code for dumpj. Okay, so what is a reaction? So reaction, the first line of the code is basically I try to have a result pointer. You will see the format of my code is always I provide the return variable name at the beginning. I declare that, and then at the end I just return that. Okay, so but this one is a little bit interesting, because the first line, usually my first line is about create a new object, but this line I'm actually directly call the object. I directly call, you see what I did here is that I call this author dumpj. So what is this author? Because reaction always have a author, has a user that who click this, who provide this reaction, or it's an author who write a comment, author write a post, but I kind of call the author even he's just one click of sarcastic or love or whatever. So I'm actually know that that author is a part of my object, but I already put it into that. So what I did here is I just directly call this author dumpj. So the first thing I do is I call that dumpj to get those two out. But let's hold on for that. Let me actually use directly come in to show you the person, because author is a person object. So in the class person, I also have this dumpj routine. So now let's actually look at the dumpj routine for the person first. It's also have about 4 lines of code. But now the first line of code, now look at the top, is the person version of dumpj. The person version of a dumpj is, the first line is JSON value star result pointer. Again, it's a result pointer. And I use new, I create a memory from my heap to represent this JSON value object. Okay, I create that. And then I'm actually going to do assignment. This is, again, very nice, very easy to do JSON programming. So what I did is, because it's a pointer, so I use the star representation. I use parenthesis star result pointer, and then put a bracket saying that the key value, because the person object really have only 2 keys. One is avatar name, one's a VSID. So what I did is avatar name is equal to the value of the avatar name within the person object, the avatar name itself. And then VSID is this VSID. So once I done this 2 line, I essentially insert this 2 value and key into the JSON. So this part of the code I'm really doing is just inserting those 2 key value pair into this JSON value object pointing by result pointer. Okay, and the thing is that now you see that my style, I always put a debugging line there. So I use the if def and end if to protect that. But essentially what it does is that if you put this in a makefile, say you want to include this debugging statement, it will print out whatever you have with the result pointer to style str string. So it will print out the JSON value like what you see earlier I showed you. So that's just a debugging statement. Okay, so now you know how I got this result pointer. So that result pointer is actually being transferred, the result pointer as a return of this call in reactions colon dump j in the orange box right there. Okay, so what has been returned at this moment is returning a JSON string is actually JSON value equivalent. It's a JSON value object equivalent of this string I put in the middle, which is avatar name Peter and the VSID blah blah blah. Okay, that's being returned back to the dump j routine down here. Okay, so we haven't done, we just, for the reaction dump j, we just done the first step yet. So now I need to add the other two. The other two is what? Is the type. I use exactly the same style, star result PTR type, and then this type, and then star result PTR creation time, and using my own time routine to generate exactly the same time string that's actually matching the input. So once I have this, I just return this pointer to whoever call me from a higher level. I'm done. Okay, so this is actually a one reaction. If on the top I can imagine is some array is going to do that, is going to, dump j may need to go through an array to actually print out each of the value to put them together as an array. But that's similar principle. You just have a layer, but at each of the level, you just worry about this particular dump j routine. And then once you have done everything, you just go up to call the highest level routine. So at the end of the routine, what you return is the whole string. Once you got this back, and then you basically get the whole thing. Okay, so this is the 5-step. I hope you follow what I'm talking about. If you miss anything or you want me to explain each of the step, let me know. We'll spend some time in the class to do that. So number one, how do you parse? Parse is easy, but SS is a little bit tricky. You have to know this bracket convention, the function to SS this structure. And you have to design an implemented C++ class which is matching for this base input, which I show you how I did it with post and also with reaction. And then you have to put this pigeonhole to put the C++ class and this code together, which is, I show you an example of the reaction. And then number 4 is important for you to be able to, for every class you create, you have this dump j function for you to reconstruct the JSON at the individual class. So you kind of divide and conquer the problem, and it's very nicely, cleanly to be able to reuse that with a large scope. And the last one, once you did 1, 2, 3, 4, how do you know it's correct? You just call dump j to the highest level C++ object, which is the dump j for post, the my post routine or the class post. You design a dump j there and stitching all the, I have to tell you that the dump j in the post will be a little bit more complicated because you have lots of elements you need to include, but it's not going to be hugely different. The style is all the same. Okay, all right, I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and this is a challenging project as usual, but this you will learn a lot in this process. Okay, good luck. Talk to you later.